Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. People are still joining in, but there will be a recording of this session, so if anyone misses pieces of this, you'll be able to see it afterwards. I'm Jeremy Simon with 3D Universe, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to another in our ongoing series of webinar sessions under the title of 3D Printing in the Workplace and STEM Education. We've done a whole bunch of sessions this week with some great speakers and content. This particular session is a session about Ultimaker Cura. So this is the Ultimaker Cura deep dive. And in this hour, I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. So I'm going to move somewhat quickly, but that's where the recording comes in handy, right? If you need to go back and review, you'll have that opportunity too. But I'm going to try to cover all the basics as well as some more advanced techniques that even people that maybe have been using Cura for quite a long time might not be aware of. I'm hoping that everyone will get something new out of this session. Okay, so like I said, this is all about Ultimaker Cura today. And I think most of you are probably familiar with Ultimaker Cura, but let's just kind of start with the basics. What is Ultimaker Cura? This is a slicing program. This is slicing software. And what that means is that this is the program you're going to use to prepare your print jobs for the printer. So once you have your 3D model, you'll bring it into Ultimaker Cura, set up how you want your object to print, and get that job prepared for the printer. What Ultimaker Cura is not is a CAD software. It's not for designing and building and creating models. You'd use a different software for that. You can use any CAD software you want, whatever you're using. Pretty much every CAD software on the planet these days can export your files in STL format. You can also use OBJ and some other formats, but STL is the most common for 3D printing. So you would use whatever CAD software you want, export to an STL file, and that's what you're going to bring into Ultimaker Cura here and use that to set up your print job. Now, if you've seen Cura in the past, maybe years ago, and you haven't seen it in a long time, I strongly encourage you to check it out again because the Ultimaker team has done a phenomenal job of doing regular updates to this software. They really do put them out fairly frequently. I'd say maybe every couple of weeks on average, they'll do some kind of an update. And they're very good about making sure that those updates are always stable and that they add valuable new functionality. So it really has grown over the years into quite a nice package. You know, I used to be one of those, and some of you might be the same way, where I used to use other slicing packages. You know, some of you like Simplify 3D, that's a popular one, and it does have some great features, but that's a paid program. And some of the features that made that unique and sort of where you could only get those features in that or other slicing packages have now been worked into Cura. So I kind of switched over to this a while back because of the extensive integration that it offers, especially with Ultimaker printers. Now, you don't have to use Cura with Ultimaker printers. It's an open source package and it works with a huge range of different kinds of 3D printers, but there's some really nice benefits of using it in combination with Ultimaker printers specifically. And I'm going to kind of focus on some of those today. We have kind of an Ultimaker focus, seeing that Ultimaker has been a sponsor of this series, and it is one of my favorite platforms for 3D printing. So I'll show you some of those nice integration features here. So you can download the latest copy of Ultimaker Cura. The easiest way to find it is just do a Google search for Ultimaker Cura. Oh, and I'm sorry, folks, before I get started, I do want to mention that you're all welcome to use the chat panel to submit questions. I opted to turn off the Q&A panel today only because what I realized is that for whatever reason, the Zoom webinar platform doesn't give you a log of the Q&A afterwards as part of the recording, but it does give you a log of the chat. So you all have access to use the chat, and your chat texts are only going to go to me, not anyone else. Other attendees will not see your messages. And I did it that way because I'd like to invite you to submit your questions through the chat, but please include your email address, at least the first time you send a message. You don't have to keep doing it. But that way, if I don't have time to get to all the questions during the session, I can follow up with you after the fact by email and answer any questions that you might have. So do feel free to use the chat throughout the session today, and I'll try to keep an eye on that as we go. So as I was saying, you can download the latest version of Ultimaker Cura. The best way is just go to Google, do a search for Ultimaker Cura. It'll take you right to it. The first link will take you right to the download page, and you can download it for Windows, Mac, or Linux. I'm running it on a Mac here today, but it should look pretty similar. Now, once you get into Cura, the very first thing that you'll see is a little wizard that'll help you get started. It's going to take you through, just kind of setting up your first printer and setting up your Ultimaker Cloud account and a couple of basic things like that. I do encourage you to go ahead and create that Ultimaker Cloud account if you haven't already done so, if you are working with Ultimaker printers, because that'll let you manage your print jobs from anywhere. You no longer have to be on the same network. You can be at home and manage and submit jobs that for a printer that might be at your office or somewhere else. So it's a really nice new set of features that they've brought with that cloud platform. During that initial wizard, you'll have the opportunity to add your first printer. And while I've already done that here, I'll show you what it looks like. You'll see a screen that looks somewhat like this, and it's going to show you any printers that you might have on your network. So you can see I have an Ultimaker S5 that's on the network right now, and you can also add other non-networked printers. So if you have maybe an older model that doesn't have networking capabilities like a 2 Plus, or even some of those third-party printers we talked about, you can see there's a huge list here, and you can even add custom machines. If it's not in this list, you can just set up a kind of generic printer with custom dimensions. So it's pretty flexible and pretty easy to add a printer to get started. So you want to set your first printer up, and you'll then see those printers here in this drop-down menu, and we'll get to that in more detail in a sec. First thing I want to point out about the overall layout of the Cura software is that it's a nice kind of a workflow which generally moves left to right. So if you look up at the very top row here, you'll see that there are buttons for the three kind of basic modes we're going to work in. We start off in prepare, and that's where we're going to get our models ready and our print job ready and get all of our settings configured the way that we want. Then once you've sliced your job and gotten it ready for the printer, you can go on over to the preview section, and that's where you're going to be able to preview, and I'll show this to you. It'll be easier to see once we get a model going. You can actually preview your print and see exactly how it's going to look before you ever send it to the printer. It's a very powerful tool, and I'll show you why that's so helpful. And then once you've sent the job to the printer, once everything looks good, you'll go on over to the monitor tab, and that's where you can actually monitor your print and monitor your queue of jobs. You can actually queue up multiple jobs and have them fed to your printers as they become available. Some really nice capabilities, again, especially when you're using those Ultimaker printers. So basic workflow is going to be moving from left to right across the top. So within the prepare mode, we're going to get started here. If you go down to the next row here, the same thing applies. You kind of move left to right. So you start with sort of opening your model, which you can do from here. There's a little folder icon. I like to actually just kind of go and grab my files from a file browser, and you can just kind of drag them in. I find that to be easier, but you can do it either way. Then you move over to the printer panel, and you can select what printer you're going to work with. So in this case, I have like I said, an Ultimaker S5 on the network, and that's what I'm going to be working with today. Now, the little icon up here, actually, you can see kind of a group of printers, and that's because I've set up a group. That's another thing that you can do with the Ultimaker printers, which I'll get to a little later. You can actually group your printers together, and then you can queue up your jobs, and it'll actually feed them to the next available printer based upon which one has the appropriate capabilities and materials set up for the job that you've configured. So I right now am going to a group of printers that includes a couple of S5s and an S3. So that's why you're seeing that group symbol there. Notice also the blue check mark there. That means that it is able to see this printer on the local network, and that's really important. If you're not seeing that symbol, sometimes Cura, I've noticed that printers can kind of lose their connectivity from time to time. You can usually resolve that by exiting out of Cura and coming back in. Sometimes you have to power cycle the printer, but as long as you're seeing that blue check mark, you know that you're on the network. The other thing that you can do is if you're not seeing that blue check mark, if it just lost that connection, you can go here, go to Manage Printers. You can select the printer that you're looking for, like my Ultimaker S5 here, and you can say connect via network. And then it should show it in the list here. You can click on refresh if you need to. It'll then show you that printer. You can select it and click on connect over here, and that'll reestablish that connection. So it shouldn't be necessary most of the time, but every now and then you'll have to reestablish that connection. So once you've got your printer selected, you kind of keep on moving over to the right. The next section here in the middle is for material selection. And this is printer specific. So because I'm using an Ultimaker printer with dual extrusion capabilities here, you'll notice that it shows two different materials and two different print cores. So in this case, I have an AA.4 core in the printer and a BB.4 core. So this is one of the nice things about Cura when it's used with Ultimaker printers is this really tight integration. Cura knows what my printer is set up for right now. It knows what kinds of print cores I have in there. It knows what kinds of materials I have loaded. It makes all that information readily available to me, so I don't have to put all that information in. It's really easy to get started. So in this case, because I am using a group here, on the materials dropdown, what I'm seeing is multiple printers. You can see here's my Ultimaker S3, and that has black Ultimaker Tough PLA and natural PVA loaded, and it knows what kind of print cores are in there. And then it's grouping my two S5s together because I could slice a job for an S5 and it would feed it to either one of my S5s, depending on which one has the right setup for that. And so it's grouping together all of my material combinations from my S5 printers here, because one of my S5s is the Pro bundle that has the material station built in. You're seeing a number of different configurations. So it's showing me all the materials that I have in that material station and all the combinations I can do. I can do the silver PLA with PVA, I could do black nylon, I could do TPU, tough PLA, etc. And then here's my other S5, which also happens to have white TPU right now, except I'm printing masks and other medical supplies to donate for the coronavirus crisis. So it's showing me all these materials that I have available. And if I click on one of these, like say I want to do a print in tough PLA, that's one of my favorite materials to work with, it's going to automatically configure everything for that material. With that one click, I have just configured all of my print settings for tough PLA. And so you don't have to mess around with all these settings. I'm going to show you how you can configure your print settings in a number of different ways, but the basics are configured for you as soon as you select that material. And it also allows you to work with a whole variety of other materials. So right now you're seeing the materials I have loaded happen to be Ultimaker materials. But if I wanted to, I could also click this custom button down here and I could set it to whatever I want. So here I could select the material, including generic materials. I could use Ultimaker materials of all different kinds. And I could go into this manage materials area here. And there you can set up custom material profiles as well. So if you want to use third-party materials, which you're perfectly welcome to do with Ultimaker printers, you could either start with a generic profile, like generic PLA, for example, if you're using a third-party brand of PLA, and then you could go in and tweak your settings, or you could come in here and actually create a profile in advance. So you just click on create, and that'll allow you to create a custom profile based on the specific settings for that material. Which doesn't seem to be working right now, oddly enough. That's very strange. But normally you'd be able to create a profile, put in the details for that particular brand and type of material, put in your print settings, and save that as a custom profile. So now it did put in a profile down here just to give me the pop-up for some reason. So now I've added the custom material. I can go in here and give it a display name, the brand. I can give it the density of that material, which helps for it to figure out, how much material is on the spool. You can give it the cost even of how much material is on for how much a spool costs and what the weight of that spool is. So for example, if if we look at some of our Ultimaker materials, I've set up those costs. So for example, for ABS, it's $49.95 a spool for a 750 gram spool. What that does is when you slice a job, Cura is actually able to tell you exactly how much material is used and exactly what that print is going to cost, which is really handy. So anyway, you can go in and set up custom profiles for custom materials and use any kind of third-party materials you want. There are also a huge array of ready-to-use material profiles that are available through the materials marketplace, which I'll show you a little bit later on. So within the materials dropdown, you've got your standard materials that are detected in the printer, or you can go to custom and set it up however you want. You can choose a print core, choose a material, and you can set it up, based on custom configurations. For right now, I'm going to stick with the basics. I'm going to select this red tough PLA that's in my printer. That's one of the materials I have in my material station. And then we move over to the material settings. Now, in the settings panel, it's showing me a summary. Right now, I've got a fast profile configured, which is for 0.2 millimeter layer heights. It's kind of a medium quality print, not real fine layers. We could certainly go much higher resolution, but it's good for a faster print. It's set up for 20% infill, supports are off, and the bed adhesion options are off, which means it's going to print with a skirt, which just helps to kind of clear out the nozzle, but it's not going to use a brim or raft, which is what would be enabled if I turn that option on. Now, if I click on this panel here, I get the drop down where I can see those settings in more detail. Now, what we're seeing here is what's called the recommended mode. Okay, so this is where you can very quickly, very easily set up a job in just a couple of clicks. Now, the first thing that you're seeing here up at the top is a great new feature that Ultimaker added, which is known as intent-based profiles. This is really powerful. So Ultimaker's default profiles were always geared a little bit more towards visual quality. Ultimaker printers have always been really well known for producing a great finish, a great looking part. But that's not always, that's not always going to be your highest priority. Sometimes you're printing something maybe for a prototype that needs to fit in with some other part, like a gear or something like that. And dimensional accuracy is what's really key. So now you have the ability to select either the default profile, which again is going to be more geared towards visual quality, and you can select different layer heights going from 0.06, that's going to be a very small, fine layer resolution to 0.1, that's 100 microns. 0.15 would be 150 microns, or 0.2. Then you can go down and select a visual profile, which is completely optimized for visual quality. So they've configured the settings so that you'll get the best possible visual quality. So if you're doing something and you want it to look as good as possible, select one of these visual profiles, which limit you to a 0.15. You can't go to thicker layers than that because they want it, again, it's being optimized for visual quality. And all the settings behind this, which I'll show you in a little while, are set for you, optimized for visual quality. Engineering is all about dimensional accuracy. So if you want a part that needs to fit properly, choose one of these engineering profiles. You have the choice of 0.1 or 0.15 layers, and all the settings will be optimized to give you the most accurate possible dimensions on that part, so it will match your CAD model exactly. And the tolerances are really good on the Ultimaker printers. I've tested this out and found those tolerances to be within about 0.1 millimeters in most cases, which is pretty good, usually good enough for most needs. And then you've got a draft profile. If you just want it to be done in the quickest possible, you don't really care about quality, you just want to get a quick prototype done, maybe just to see how your model is looking, you know you're going to make further changes, choose a draft profile, and that'll optimize for speed over everything else. So these are really handy. I'm going to keep it on a fairly fast profile. We'll just choose draft right now, only because I'm going to be slicing again and again throughout this demo, and I want to keep that as quick as possible. Next is the slider for infill. So you can, with a single click, choose how much infill you want. This is how dense the interior parts of your object are going to be. So 0% means you'll have a hollow object. It'll just be the shells, the walls, and nothing on the inside, which is not usually the best option, because if there's any flat parts on top, those aren't going to print well without some infill. So you can click to say 20% or 40% or 50%, whatever you want, all the way up to 100. There's also an option for gradual infill, which will gradually increase the density of the infill as you go up. If that's, it's not one that I use often, but it is a nice option that's available if you want it. And then you have the support checkbox. This is great, especially on dual extrusion printers. So if you check that box to say that you want supports, it's going to automatically generate supports to handle any overhanging areas. Now, this particular model actually doesn't need supports. This is a popular calibration print that you might have seen called the 3D Benchy, available on Thingiverse. And it's designed to be printed without supports. And you can see a lot of nice features like these nice curved surfaces and overhangs and bridging and stuff like that. But if you wanted to turn on supports, it would put supports anywhere that have overhangs of, by default, it's about 45 degrees. You can change that. So what you can do is you can choose which extruder to print those supports with. By default, it says extruder 1, which means it's going to print those supports using the same material I'm printing the object with, tough PLA in this case, and I'd have to break away those supports after the print's done. The great thing about dual extrusion is you can choose the second extruder for your supports, and in this case, it's going to print those supports in PVA, which is a water-soluble support material. It's phenomenal. It just, after the print's done, you take it off the plate, you drop it into water, and those supports dissolve away, and you're left with a perfectly clean surface. Because when you normally print supports with a build material, the traditional way, like you'd have to do with a single extruder printer, when you break away those supports, you're going to have kind of a rough surface left behind, because they've got to leave a tiny little gap between the supports and the object, and it leaves a little bit of messiness when you break away the supports. With PVA, there's no gap left between the supports and the object. So when you dissolve the supports away, you get a perfectly clean surface, and it really looks a lot better. So it's a great option for more complex objects. It's also handy when you have an object that has sort of interior cavities where maybe you wouldn't be able to get in there to break away the supports. You can dissolve those away, and that's where soluble supports are a great alternative as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the supports for now, though. And then bed adhesion is the last checkbox here. If you leave it off, it's still going to print a skirt, which is handy. It's just a line around the object to help kind of make sure the nozzle is nice and clear before you start printing, but it's not connected to the object. It's nothing that you have to clean up. If you check this box, then it's going to print with either a brim or a raft, depending on the material that you're using. That's good for materials that are more challenging to print, that tend to warp off the build plate. So maybe if you're doing ABS, some nylons, you'd benefit by checking that box. But in this case, since I'm using tough PLA, I do not need that. And I prefer not to have to clean that up off my print. You'd have to kind of cut away a brim or detach a raft. So I prefer to do without those when possible. So that's your recommended mode. And it's that simple. It's a couple of clicks. You can just click your profile, your infill, whether or not you want support and adhesion, and you're ready to go. You're ready to slice and you're ready to print. So that's the best way to get most of your prints started. In most cases, you're going to find this sufficient. Now, not all materials give you the intent-based profiles. Those have only been optimized for some of the Ultimaker brand materials. So if you're using a third-party material, you're only going to see the default profile up here, but you still get to choose your layer height and your infill and these other options with a couple of clicks. So it's still really easy to get going. Now, if you want more control over your print, and you will need to do this for getting into some of the more advanced scenarios, you might find that in some types of prints, the default profiles are just not optimally suited. So going to the custom mode with this button down here at the bottom of this panel, you can get into all the different advanced settings and get full control of your print. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these today. That would take way too much time, but I'll show you what you can do here real quickly. So number one, pay attention to the fact that at the top here, you can configure settings for each of the extruders if you're using a dual extruder machine. So right now I'm on extruder 1. I could also go and configure the settings for extruder 2. You'll notice that a lot of the settings throughout the panel have this little chain link symbol. That means that that particular setting is linked to the two extruders. So if you change that setting here, it's going to apply automatically to both extruders. If it doesn't have that link symbol, that means that that setting is going to be unique to each extruder. So just keep that in mind as you're setting up your settings. Now, sorry, that's my Alexa going off there, folks. So now you can go through and configure all these settings, and there's a number of ways of controlling which settings you're seeing here, because there's a lot of settings available. One way is this little sandwich icon here next to the search box here. So you can search for settings if you know what you're looking for. Like if I want to set my infill amount, you can just type in infill and it'll zero in on any of the settings that have that in the name. But what I like to do is, number one, you can configure quickly how many of these settings you're seeing with this little sandwich symbol here. So you can choose from basic, advanced, expert, and all. And those are going to give you increasing numbers of settings. So basic is only going to show you some of the settings, advanced turns on more of them, and expert shows you even more, and then all turns them all on. There's like over 400 settings available, so it's a lot. You usually don't need to be seeing all of them. And then if you want to control to individual setting visibility, you can either, under that same menu, you can go to Manage Setting Visibility here, or you can also use the little gear symbol that's in any one of these category bars here. So clicking that's going to take you to the Setting Visibility menu. And here you can see all the settings that are available, and you can just check the box to turn any of them on. So if you know something that somebody tells you to use a certain setting and you're not seeing it, what you can do is go in here and search for that setting, like some kind of an infill setting. Maybe you want to set your infill line directions, which I don't currently have turned on. Just check the box, and now it will be visible in your settings browser. So you can control that way what you're seeing. Now, to learn about these settings, you can just hover over each of the settings, and you'll get a pop-up on the left side there that explains exactly what that setting is for. So that's a really handy way to learn the basics of what the setting is for. But if you want to go more in depth, I want to pause here and recommend a great plugin. We're going to look at the marketplace a little later, and I'll show you some of the great plugins that are available. There's one called the Cura Settings Guide, which is really helpful. And so when you install that plugin, it'll be up here under your extensions menu, Settings Guide. And when you go to that settings guide, you can go to any one of these settings and you'll see that you get this great visual, detailed description of each and every setting. So they not only give you a great description, but they show you visually exactly what that setting is doing, which I find really helpful. I'm a visual learner. So this is a wonderful tool to learn all about these different settings that are available and where they can be applicable in your print. Some of them even have animations that'll show exactly what that does. So this is a great plugin to add to your Ultimaker Cura setup. So as you can see, the advanced mode gives you all kinds of control over your print. So you can have as much or as little, by going back to the recommended mode here, as much or as little control over your prints as you want. That's one of the reasons I really like Ultimaker Cura, is because of that flexibility. Let's see. So next, let's take a look at actually getting our print job set up. So as I said, you can load models either using this little open folder icon over here, or file, open file, or just drag it in from your file browser. So we've got a model loaded here. Now, notice these tools on the left right now are grayed out. That's because I don't have my model selected. So if I click onto my model, it's now selected and those tools become visible. I can move around easily using your mouse. You can zoom in and out. You can rotate around your object. to see it from different angles. You can pan around to, move your build area and see it from different angles. Like if you want to zoom in, that becomes really helpful to get it where you want. So you got a lot of control over your view. It's going to vary. I'm using a touchpad here, so it's going to vary a little bit for mouse users, but you'll figure those out very quickly. It's usually a combination of left or right mouse button, and sometimes combined with shift, and you can move around and pan around in all those different ways. So when you select your object, let's look at these tools here. The one at the top is the transform tool, the move tool. So you can move or use the shortcut T. You can click this or use the T key to get to this and move your object around. You can move it up, you can move it side to side, you can do that by grabbing these little handles. Notice that you've got these multicolored handles in the different axes here. So you can grab those handles to move it around. You can also just grab your object and just move your object around freely. And one of the things you'll notice is if I try to move this object up into midair and let go, it's going to drop right back down. That's because in most cases, you want your object lying flat on the build plate. If for some reason you're doing something tricky and you want to have it sitting up, maybe you want to put supports under the whole thing, you have to go into your preferences. One of the options here in general is automatically drop models to the build plate. You can uncheck that box if you want to change that behavior. I'll also just point out real quick while I'm here in the preferences, Ultimaker being a European company based in the Netherlands, you'll see that the default currency symbol is the euro symbol. I like to come in and change that to the $sign just because, again, you will get cost estimates for your prints, and I want to see that in US dollars myself. So you can change that here in preferences as well. I'll also point out, since I mentioned that cost estimation, that the materials don't have those prices set up by default. So it is worth taking the time to go through here and put in those costs for all the materials that you're going to be using. It's pretty quick and easy to do, and once you do it, that's all saved. So if you put in the cost and the weight for each spool, then you'll be able to see those cost estimates when you slice, which I'll show you here in just a moment. Let's see. So now we've got the move covered. You can move it around. Notice you can also do it by measurements here. So if I wanted to, I could put in an exact measurement. I could move it to, say, to the left 20 millimeters. You could do it that way as well. But usually you can just kind of drag it around to put it where you want it. Next down is the scaling tool, which you can get to with the S key. You can scale the object. Notice by default, the uniform scaling box is checked so that if I scale it in any direction, it's going to scale in all directions. If you uncheck that box, then you have the ability to scale individually in different directions. So if I wanted to print a really long boat, not a long and narrow, 3D benchy, I could do that. Normally, we would usually use uniform scaling. That keeps it easier. Snap scaling will determine whether it snaps to, specific increments or whether you have complete freedom of scaling. So you've got a lot of flexibility with scaling. That's pretty handy, especially if you're doing things that need to be customized, like if it's something that you're going to wear. It's very handy to be able to scale a model. You can do that right in here. You don't need to go back to your CAD software. Let me go ahead and just delete this real quick and get my basic model back so that we have our default scaling. Okay, so then the next one down is rotation. Again, you get these handy guides in all three different axes, so you can easily rotate your object in any one of those different axes. I'm not going to rotate it in the others because I would no longer have it sitting flat on the bed if I did that. You can, again, turn on or off snap rotation. And there's some helpful things here. They do have an option to lay flat. So if you have a model that just wasn't designed to where it does lay flat on the bottom, Cura will do its best to analyze your object and automatically lay it on the bed where it has a flat surface for the best connection. It doesn't always work optimally, but usually it does. And then you have the option to select a face to lay flat. So if you have a particular surface that you want to have lay on the bed, you can click that button and then click a specific surface on your object. Like, I don't know, maybe I want this to print upside down. If I click up here on the top surface, it's going to put that surface on the bottom. That's not what I want in this case, though. So I'm going to go ahead and click. Let's see if I can rotate it back with the bottom surface. No, it's not seeing that bottom surface, I think, because of the lettering there. I'm just going to go ahead and reload my object real quick to get around that. So those are your transform tools. You have the ability to move it around, scale it, rotate it. You also have the ability to mirror it. So if you want to flip it left and right, back and forth, any of the directions, you can mirror your object. So this is handy if you're doing something that might have a left or right-handed version. You don't have to do two separate models. You can just mirror it and you get an opposite version so that things will be flipped around. The other controls down here are a little bit more advanced, so I'm going to come back to these. This one is per model settings, this one is SupportBlocker, and then this one is for assigning your model to a specific extruder. So we're going to come back to those in a short while. So now let's go ahead and slice. I'm just going to choose default settings. I have a draft profile selected, and let's just slice this object. It's going to go ahead and slice it. Normally, Ultimaker Cura slices automatically. That is an option that you have in preferences. I have that turned off so that it doesn't slice every time I change something. I like to have control over that. So now I've sliced, and you can see this is a 1 hour print. It's going to use 12 grams of material. It's going to cost me 77 cents. Tells me immediately, before I even waste time going to a printer, exactly what I'm looking at in terms of time and cost. If I hover over this eye here, I get a lot of detail about what's taking that time. I can see exactly how much that time is spent on infill versus outer walls versus retractions and everything else. And that's helpful if you want to really fine tune your settings. If you're really trying to get it to print as quickly as possible, you can maybe look and see, oh, my outer walls are taking a long time. Maybe I'll increase the outer wall speed because I care more about speed than quality. So this is handy if you want to dive deeper into how your print is going to be handled. Now, once it's sliced, you're ready to print if you want. I could just say print over the network because it is a network-enabled printer, and it'll send this job over the network and start it. I can use this drop-down to save to a file and put it on a USB flash drive, or I can print via cloud in this case because Ultimaker has this new Ultimaker cloud platform that lets me manage my jobs from wherever. So if I was not on the same network as my printer, I could still print to that printer via the cloud. But I don't want to print yet. I recommend that you always preview your jobs before you print. So you can either click the button here after you slice. Down here, there's a preview button, or you can go up on top and select preview. Same thing either way. When you go to preview, you're going to get an actual preview layer by layer of what your print is going to look like. So if I scroll down layer through layer, you can see the infill there. I selected a 20% infill pattern, so you can see exactly what that's going to look like. There's my infill there, printing at 20%. Let me pan this around a little. And as I continue to scroll up, you can see exactly what it's going to do. And this is a great way of just kind of looking at what your printer is going to try to do and thinking about, is this going to print well for me? You know, the more you get to know about what your printer can and can't do, and you know how well it can handle overhangs and bridging and things like that, you'll be able to pick things up immediately. When you look at this preview, you'll be able to spot things where you can say, oh, I think that's going to be a problem. I better go and put supports in there or something like that. But the most important thing to look at, and this is why I always recommend that you preview, is scroll down to layer 1. There's a scroll bar here on the right side. Scroll all the way down to your first layer and look at this, because that's going to tell you if your whole first layer is making good contact with your bed. I can see that the whole base of this 3D Benchy is being printed here. That's what you want to see. If you're going to have problems with a printer, with a print, it's probably going to start off with first layer adhesion issues. So let me show you what that means. If I was to load in a different model, let me clear this model here and go back to prepare mode. And I'm going to load in a different version of 3D Benchy that I set up, which looks good. Okay, looks pretty good to me here. I'm going to go ahead and slice. I think I'm ready to go. But if I was to go ahead and print this, I'd have a problem. And here's why. I'm going to go to preview mode. If we scroll down to layer 1, look at that. It's only printing one side because this is actually rotated just a little bit. It's just about 1.5 degrees off axis. And I would not have been able to see that before. But now I can see that it's not laying flat. If I scroll up to layer 2, now I can see that it's printing the rest of that. But that everything over here on the right, it's actually going to be trying to print just slightly up. It's going to be about, you know, in this case, I'm using a 0.2 millimeter profile. So that's going to be about 0.2 millimeters up. Actually, I think my first layer height is 0.27, so it's going to be 0.27 millimeters up. And that might not seem like much, but it's enough to prevent it from sticking well to your bed. So I always recommend that you look here in the preview to make sure that your first layer looks good. Let me go back to our good model here. And it's going to go ahead and, in this case, I need to reslice. It's not showing me the preview because it hasn't sliced yet. There's our preview, and now our first layer looks good, okay? Now that I previewed it, I could go ahead and print. I won't bother doing that now, but at that point, you're all ready to print. So once you send your print, you can then move over to the monitor tab up here on the top. I can go to monitor, and now you can see your printers that are on the network, and you would see if I had a job going, I would see that job here as printing. Right now it shows idle, and I would see the progress of that job. And I can even click on the camera here to get a live view of what's happening in that printer. Again, if you're using an Ultimaker printer. And then you also from here have the option to get into further management through Cura Connect. And that's what this manage in browser thing is here. So if you click on that, and I already have it loaded here, so I'll just switch over to my browser window. it'll take you over to Cura Connect, which lets you see things like you can see all of your print jobs here across all of your printers, and not just the current job, but notice down here, I can see all my previous jobs that are printed. And if I wanted to, I could select one of those previously completed jobs and I could reprint it right from here. I don't even have to go back and reslice it. I could just reprint a job that I want to run again. So this is really handy. There's some other nice things about this web-based management. It shows you things like maintenance tasks. So for example, right down here on my S5 Pro bundle, it's telling me I need to replace my filter on my Air Manager because I've been using it for 1,700 hours. So I'm due for a change. If I go over to the printers screen here, you can see other things. So here I have the printers that are in this group. Notice right here on my S3, it's telling me I have some maintenance tasks. So if I click on that, scroll down here, you can see it gives you a maintenance schedule. It tells you things that you need to do every month, every 3 months, every year. And it's telling me that I'm overdue for cleaning my printer and lubricating my axles. Now I actually did that pretty recently, but I didn't mark that as completed. I'll go ahead and do that now. And it's going to then track that for you here. So it does a nice job of telling you exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it on your Ultimaker printers. So that's Cura Connect. And then you can also access Cura Cloud, which is back in Cura. I'll just show you. It's in the upper right corner there. That icon here is where you can connect to your Ultimaker Cloud account. And if you're not signed in, you can do that from here. And then when you click the Ultimaker account button, that'll take you to your Ultimaker account. And from there, you can use the drop down and you can use this little grid icon up here to go to the cloud or the marketplace, which we'll look at in a moment. And so this is cloud that we're looking at here. So in cloud, you can manage your printers, you can manage your printer groups, and more importantly, you can manage teams. So you can actually set up teams within your organization and give those teams access to different printers or printer groups. So that's pretty handy as well. Let's get back to Cura though. So we've got more ground to cover here, and I don't know if we're going to get through it all in time as it is. So we've taken a look at basics, single extrusion printing, and doing dual extrusion in the sense of supports. But what if you want to do a dual color print? What if I wanted to use 2 different colors of tough PLA, for example, to print this 3D Benchy? Well, the first thing is you need 2 different models to do multicolor printing. So it just so happens that they have that for the 3D Benchy. They were nice enough to create dual extrusion versions of it. So what we can do is bring in 2 separate models, one that has some components and the other that has other components. And if I bring those in, you'll see that here. So now we've got 2 models. Some of them have some parts of the 3D Benchy and the other one has the other components. But I don't want to print it like this, right? The first thing I want to do is I want these parts here. Let's say I want these parts to print in red. That's what's selected right now. But I want these other parts to print in a different material. The first thing I need to do is go up to my materials panel. And I'm going to have to do this custom because right now I have a BB print core in the right extruder, which is only going to let me print PVA. So I'm just going to go to custom because what I would do here is go to my second extruder and let's pretend that I have an AA core in there, which you need for the build materials. And it's telling me here that I can't print PVA in a AA core. That's why it's red. So let's select Tough PLA green. We'll do a Christmas themed 3D Benchy. And now that I have that selected, I can go to this other model and I'll say, using this button over here on the left, I'll say print that model with extruder 2. Now it turns green. All right, so now each model is going to print with that color, but I don't want them to print like this. I want those to be combined. Now, you might be tempted to select one of these models and use the move tool and kind of try to get them to overlap, but you're not probably going to get it perfect, and especially because it needs to be raised up in this case, and it's going to drop it back down, and this is just not the way to do it. What you want to do is select both models. So I'm going to use Command A, Control A on Windows. Now both models are selected, and if you right-click on your model, you get options here, including Merge Models. So select Merge Models, and it's going to merge them according to the original origin point from the CAD software. So as long as you model both of these with the same origin point, they'll be lined up perfectly. And now you can see that. Now they're perfectly aligned with the different colors exactly where we want them. And now if I slice this, it's going to give us a multicolor preview. So once this is done slicing, I'll go into the preview mode. And again, you can just kind of check out how it's going to print. And as you scroll through the layers, you're going to see exactly what it's doing with each color. You can see it's doing all of that in red, then it switches to green for some parts, and you can see exactly how it's going to print. So that's how you do dual color printing. You got to have the two models for the two different colors, select both models and select which extruder you want each to print with. Then you select all the models, right click and merge. That's how you do that. Okay, let's talk about some more advanced things that you can do now that we've covered the basics. Sometimes you might want to customize your print settings for specific regions of the print. And you can do that. You can actually do quite a lot in that regard. So let's look at how we can do that. Let's say, first of all, let me simplify this a little bit by going back to my single extrusion print model. Let me go back to, let's see, 3D Benchy, the normal one. And let's say that I want to print the front part of the boat where it's more dense in terms of the infill compared to the rest of it for whatever reason. Maybe I want that to just be a stronger component of the part. You can do that. The way you would do that is you would have to load in some other geometry that you can use to mask off the area that you want to customize. So you could load in a cube or something like that. I could pull in this 20mm box that I have here, which dropped in behind there. And I could use that as an object, which I can then, scale and use that to overlap certain parts of the object. So, and I'll show you what else to do from there. But I'm going to show you a quick shortcut. So instead of having to use a separate model, what you can do is select your basic model. Over here on the left toolbar, remember one of these that we didn't get to yet was this one at the bottom, SupportBlocker. Now, if I click on SupportBlocker, normally what this tool is used for is for blocking supports in certain areas. So if I now click on my object in a certain spot, like down here, it's going to put in a little cube there that's kind of semi-translucent. And what that means is that anywhere that overlaps with my model, it is not going to print supports, even if I have supports turned on. It's going to block them from that area. So there might be times where you want to print with supports, but you don't want supports in certain areas. That's what the SupportBlocker tool is for. And I can select that SupportBlocker as a separate object. And you can do everything else that you could with a normal object. I can scale it. So maybe I want to make it bigger. I can move it around to put it where I want. But here's what's really cool. You can use that SupportBlocker object to do other things. So now that I have that SupportBlocker object selected, I can go to this other tool here where it says per model settings. And for this particular model, I could print it as a normal model, which means it would just print as an object. That's not what I want. I could print as support, which is not what I want in this case. In fact, the SupportBlocker does the opposite. This next one, though, is where all the power is. Modify settings for overlaps. So if I select that, modify settings for overlaps, now I can choose any settings I want. I'm going to remove the ones that are in here and select settings. And here's where you can choose what settings to customize. Not all settings are available here because there's some things that you can't do differently within a model. Like you can't change the layer height for different parts of the model because that would just be too complex in terms of the way the printer would need to handle that. But I could do things like changing my infill density. So let's add in infill density. The default is 20%. Let's say that I want this part to be 75%, really dense, okay? Now, when I slice this, you're going to see that in that portion of the model, the supports are going to be, or sorry, the infill is going to be a lot denser than the rest of the model. So let's go to preview and let's scroll through our layers. So there's our 20% infill, but as we move on up, see on the right side there, that's 75% infill. So it's a really powerful tool. I could add as many of these as I want. So I could go back here to select my main object, SupportBlocker, click in here to add another SupportBlocker, and I could go back over here to per model settings, select this modify settings for overlaps, customize what settings I want there. Maybe I want to do something different there. I could add as many of these in as I want. So for example, let me clear the build plate, pull in another model real quick here. This is one I love to print for when I'm doing trade shows and stuff where I like to, there's these great models on Thingiverse that it's a series of visual displays for 3D printing terminology. And they have different models for showing different concepts like infill percentage, infill style, bridging, supports, all these different things. So this one is for showing infill percentage. So you can see the model as it is, it's just going to print, it's going to, you know how this is going to look. It's going to be fairly solid throughout, and that's not what we want. I want each of these blocks on top to show the different percentages of infill and what they would look like. So what I would do is I would add in a SupportBlocker. Let's drop one in there. I would resize that to cover, whoops, I resized my main object there. That's not what I want. Let me select just the SupportBlocker. So I would resize that, make it a little larger so it can cover that whole thing. Let's move it up and over. Let's do this 80% one here. So I would move it so that it's overlapping that square. I would move it up so that it's coming just to the base of that little area there, like that. And then I would configure per model settings. And in this case, there's two things I'd want to do: infill density and top layers. You can put in as many of these SupportBlocker objects as you want and use those as tools for customizing settings using the modify settings where it overlaps. So that's a really handy and powerful way to customize your settings throughout different regions of a print, and you can achieve all kinds of different custom kinds of settings that way. Now you can see that we're getting that 80% infill in there. So that's how you can customize settings within your model. Now, another handy sort of more advanced thing that you might have a need for, I'm just going to get rid of that tool there, is post-processing. So up here on the extensions menu, there's a post-processing option, and you can go to modify Gcode, and here you can add scripts, and there are some nice scripts packaged in here, two of which I find to be most useful. One is pause at height. You can use that to automatically pause your job when it gets to a certain height. So maybe you want to swap out a certain color and change at a certain height and do a different color from there on up. You can have your printer pause when it gets to whatever height. You can put in 5 millimeters or 10 millimeters, and your printer will automatically pause when it gets to that height. You can change filament or do whatever else you need to do. Maybe you want to drop something onto an internal cavity of your print and then have it continue printing around that, and you can resume your print. So that's a handy script to use. My other favorite one is change at Z. Using that, you can specify a height, and you can say at that height, I want to do something. I want to change my print speed, or I want to change my flow rate, or I want to change my bed temperature or extruder temperature or fan speed. So you can actually change various settings about your print at different places in the print. So this is really handy. For example, if you want to sort of experiment with a new material, you can do what's called a temperature tower. You can download these on Thingiverse, and it'll give you different sort of components. Some of them are like bridges, some of them are sort of shelves or different components that are different at different layers. And you can use this script, and you can add it in as many times as you want, and at different layer heights, at different, at 5 millimeters, at 10 millimeters, at 15, et cetera, you can change to a different temperature. Go at, print at 200 Celsius, then 205 Celsius, then 210, and you can see which temperature gives you the best performance in terms of bridging and overhangs and things like that. So that's really handy for doing some more advanced things like that. So you can get to that again under extensions, post-processing, modify Gcode. Now let's take a look at the marketplace, because this is really powerful. The marketplace, which is in the upper right corner there when you have Cura installed, gives you a few different sections. Plugins. Plugins is where you can go and download all sorts of plugins that enhance the functionality of Ultimaker Cura. I already pointed out one of my favorites is the settings guide. There's other sort of featured plugins at the top here. Some of these include CAD integration. So if you're a SolidWorks user, you can plug this in, and you can have seamless integration between SolidWorks and Ultimaker Cura. They have other types of plugins that give you all kinds of other functionality. One of the other ones that I'm really fond of is down, let's see, where is it? There's one called here, Custom Supports. So if you're a user that's been using Simplify 3D because that was the only slicer that let you manually click and point where you want supports to go, now you can do that in Ultimaker Cura. Just add in this plugin and you can manually put supports exactly where you want them. There's all kinds of other plugins here, and right now these are all free. They may add in a paid plugin marketplace in the future, but for right now these are all free plugins. Then we go over to materials, and this is the fairly new materials marketplace. And this is great if you want to explore some of the many, many materials that are available on the marketplace now, some of the more advanced materials. They have lots of different vendors in here, and each of those vendors has different materials available. So if you click on a vendor like 3D Universe, you'll see, for example, our 3D Universe nylon carbon fiber material in here. And you can get access to the technical data sheets and the safety data sheet and printing guidelines. But with a one-click install, I can just click this button and that'll install that profile for that material. And then you just select that material profile from your profiles dropdown, and you're ready to go. It has all the settings that have been completely optimized for different models of Ultimaker printers. and it makes it incredibly easy to get started with these materials that might otherwise take quite some time to get sort of tweaked to print the way that you want. There's a lot of testing that goes into building these profiles, so it'll really save you a lot of time. So the material marketplace is well worth exploring. You'll find a lot of cool materials in there that give you all kinds of different properties and capabilities that you might not have even known were out there. And then the installed category over here shows you what you have installed. Oh, you can see another one that I like called Thingy Browser. That's another plugin which gives you a direct tie-in to the Thingiverse platform. If you like using that, you don't have to go out of Ultimaker Cura. You can browse Thingiverse from within Cura and bring objects directly into it. So that's another one that I like. So lots of plugins, lots of materials. You can get to those all through the marketplace. They're constantly adding more. So that's a really powerful place to expand your capabilities. So I think I just barely got through everything I wanted to cover here. And I know that was a lot. So I'm going to take a look at the chat panel and see what I missed in the way of questions here now. Let's see. I have the latest version of Cura 4.6.1, but when I pull down extensions in the top menu, I only see 3 items: Cura backups, post-processing with only modified Gcode, and check for updates. Shouldn't there be more items in the extensions menu? So no, the only reason I'm seeing more items here is because I've installed those other plugins. I installed the settings guide and I installed the Thingy browser. So by default, the only ones you'll see are post-processing, Cura backups, and update checker. And it's worth touching on those other 2. So update checker is pretty obvious. It checks for updated versions of Cura, but Cura backups is really nice. You can manage backups here, and you can back up all of your Cura configurations, because as you spend time in Cura, you start building custom material profiles, you start fine-tuning settings just the way you want them. There's all kinds of things that you're going to start to tweak. And if you ever have to do a clean install, or if you move to another computer, you don't want to have to do all that over again. Or maybe there's somebody else in your organization that needs all the same types of configurations. This is a great way to back up and restore everything at once. So these backups include all of your configurations, your plugins, everything that you have configured. And there's a checkbox here for auto backup so that you can have Cura automatically do a backup daily. And that's really nice. So now I could go back to any of these previous dates that I did a backup, and I could restore that with a single click. So this is a really nice tool that they added in here. It used to be a plugin, but it's built right in now. So I think that's the answer to that question, that's why those things weren't showing there. Another question here. Let's see, I already answered that one. Where are you posting the link? So I gave you that in the chat there. And I don't have any other questions yet. So if anyone else has questions, now is a great time to put those into the chat before we wrap up here. We've got just a couple minutes left. But as I said, I will be sharing a recording of this session. So if you'd like to go back and review, I know I covered a lot of ground here. But as I said, I do hope that everyone got at least something new out of this that you maybe weren't aware of before. As you can see, Cura has come a long way. And as I said, they're constantly doing updates. They're really doing a good job, I think, of putting out regular updates with new features, but at the same time being careful not to break things. They're pretty good about putting out stable versions. If you do happen to need to go to a previous version for some reason, you can do that. When you go to the Cura site, there's an option to download prior versions as well. So you can do that from the Ultimaker Cura download page. Okay, not seeing any new questions here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank all of you for joining, and I want to remind you that we do have another session coming up at 4:30, which is in just another half hour here today at Central Time. Kevin Smith is going to be running that session and is going to give us a good tutorial on Autodesk Fusion 360 as part of a sort of a design, what he calls a design jam. So it's kind of about how to come up with designs, and he's going to do a lot to show us how we can do that quickly and efficiently in Autodesk Fusion. So I hope you'll join us for that one as well. That same link that I gave you in the chat is where you can find the details and the link for that session as well. Meanwhile, I did get another question here, which I'll answer real quick before I wrap. Can you do 2 materials with, well, it says tau and play. I'm not sure what TAU is. Maybe that was a typo. TPU, and I think you meant PLA. Okay, got it. So can you do 2 materials with TPU and PLA? Well, theoretically, you could set it up that way. So yes, you could configure a job to have TPU on one extruder and PLA on the other extruder. Cura is going to let you do that. They're going to let you slice it. you could send it to the printer. Problem is, I don't think that's going to work very well because certain materials just don't stick well to each other. I haven't tried TPU and PLA myself. I don't know how well those stick to each other. It might work. I just can't recall for sure. There is a handy page, and I'll see if I can find it real quick here. There we go. Okay, let me put this link into the chat as well, because I think this one is really helpful as well. What you'll see here is a nice compatibility chart that shows which materials are compatible with which other materials. So if we look at PLA here and we go across to TPU, that X means no, it's not really supported. Doesn't mean it won't, it's not possible, but it probably means that it's not going to work too well. You can see that you can use PLA with PLA, of course, and you can use PLA with tough PLA as an experimental combination. In terms of things that combine with TPU, we have ABS is listed as an experimental combination. So you might be able to do ABS with TPU. You might be able to do nylon with TPU. And you might be able to do polycarbonate with TPU. But those are all listed as experimental combinations. So this is a helpful reference to give you a sense of what may or may not work, but you can certainly do those types of multi-material combinations in Cura. All you would do is set those up the same way we did for the dual extrusion printing. So in your material setup here, you would choose, tough PLA or whatever material you want for extruder 1, and maybe, just choose TPU or whatever the second material is here for extruder 2, and then assign extruder 1 and extruder 2 for the 2 different models, merge them, and away you go. Hope for the best. So yes, you can do that. All right, not seeing any other new questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap. Thanks everyone for joining. See you soon.